Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has told troops gathered at the Gaza border that they will soon see the inside of the Palestinian enclave, suggesting an expected ground invasion aimed at annihilating Hamas could be nearing. At the same time, the US State Department has issued a worldwide caution security alert. This is for American citizens abroad. If it cites increased tensions in various locations around the world and potential for attacks and violence against Americans. The alert didn't single out any specific global event or war, but it does come amid this ongoing conflict in the Middle East. And for more, we're joined by SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, good evening. Perhaps let's start there on that State Department warning.
The last time they issued a worldwide caution of this nature, Iman, was in August last year, after an American strike took out the former al-Qaeda leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who, of course, you'll recall, was killed in an American airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan. Let me just reiterate and read the worldwide caution that was issued by the State Department a short time ago. Due to increased tensions in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution. U.S. citizens should stay alert in locations that are frequented by tourists. They should enroll in an application that's called Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, where they will receive emergency alerts and updates from the State Department. And they are also asked to follow the State Department's social media platforms on Facebook and on X, formerly known as Twitter. As you mentioned, there is no specific threat, Iman, but you have seen the protests that have emanated out of places in various locations in the Middle East. We have seen anti-US and Israeli protests in places like Iraq. We have seen the burning of American flags in Tunis, Tunisia, calls for the American ambassador there to be expelled. We have seen anti-riot police in Amman, Jordan, prevent protesters from protesting and walking on the heavily fortified US embassy. And then we've also seen states sanctioned protests in places like Iran, where protesters were carrying posters that read "Death to America" and "Death to Israel." So the reading, certainly from the State Department, is that American citizens are under increased threat in different locations around the world, but as you mentioned, no specific threat that they're speaking about at this time.
These are days shown where there is much afoot, and the U.S. administration seems to have its eyes on a number of different issues all at the same time. Chief among them, the aftermath of President Joe Biden's solidarity visit to Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu. So tell us a little bit more about this primetime address from the Oval Office later tonight. We're expecting, as you've advised us, that he's going to make the case for funding war efforts not only in Israel but in Ukraine. And we've seen the green light just today, even though it's much less than what was envisaged, the passing through of aid now between Egypt and Gaza at that Rafah crossing.
Well, it's essentially being billed by the White House, Iman, as a foreign policy speech, right? And you expect President Biden to come out and sort of speak to the sentiment that America can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? You've got the Israeli conflict that is now growing and the need for additional funds, America being the biggest backer of Israel in that region. And of course, you have the long-standing war, now a long-standing war, as it relates to Ukraine and Russia. Then you've also got a rising China and issues around Taiwan. And to bring on Republican support, he's going to put some money in that package for increased border security at the southern border with Mexico. So this is going to be a president that will come out tonight in the Oval Office seeking to create consensus around these issues, seeking to explain why conflicts in these far-flung areas of the world matter to Americans, why they should continue funding to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, just do the math. I don't even think I could pronounce the number if I were to say that in rands. So this is a lot of money they're talking about here. And the president also recognizing that there is growing sentiment and anti-sentiment towards continuing the funding packages to Ukraine, particularly from right-wing members of the Republican Party. So this is a fine line to tread here, particularly in the context that is also running for re-election, and that there's growing opposition from the Trump MAGA Republicans in the United States Congress. So he has to make the case tonight. Whether he will succeed or not will depend on whether he can bring enough Republicans on board from a divided Congress. Right? You have Republicans Republicans that control the House of Representatives, and you have Democrats in charge of the Senate. And so can the two houses meet in terms of this funding package? He will certainly seek to make that case tonight.
A final question. You talked about how this is all going down and where those fissures lie between the Republicans and the Democrats on some of these big issues, and how he's able to build consensus, even to those outside of his party, and that's within the political complex. What about what's happening in American society? I know that it's hard, Sherwin, and you've been keeping your eyes on developments in the UN, political developments vis-a-vis Washington and the White House. So that's been quite a busy project. But have you been able to gauge where Americans are on both these issues, predominantly Israel, and perhaps even on the funding with regard to the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think he's trying to be very strategic in coupling the Ukraine funding request with the Israeli request. There's greater support for Israel's defense among the American public than there is right now for Ukraine. And I think this is a strategic move by the White House to couple these two together. As you have witnessed protests around the world, there have been protests in the United States, in support of Israel, but also growing protests in support of the Palestinian cause. There were about 300 people on the floor, not on the floor of the United States Congress, but certainly in the lobby area. A number of them were arrested, calling for the United States to back a ceasefire. Look, this U.S. veto in the UN Security Council certainly did nothing to help America's case in relation to this worldwide caution, right, and this anti-American, anti-Israeli sentiment. And so there are certainly quarters within the Democratic Party itself calling for the United States to break this posture, this blanket support for Israel, and take a more nuanced position. But given the political persuasions in the United States, and of course an election looming, that's hard to see in the short term.